What's going on? Julie Schatz here. I am back with Splice to bring you another tutorial. Before I get into the details, make sure you go check me out on all socials, Julie Schatz Music. I'm ramping up my YouTube channel a lot, so go check that out. Today we're going to be focusing on the broader concept of just how to make your productions more unique. I have 7 tips for you. Now, the examples I'm going to show you are more so R&B, hip-hop based, but they definitely translate to any genre, and a lot of the tips that I've learned watching other producers outside of hip-hop, so like EDM producers and pop producers. All this stuff translates for any genre you're working in. I hope it helps you. Let's get right into it. Tip number 1 is thinking outside of the box in terms of your chord progressions and how you manipulate your chords. So a great example of this is Sicko Mode by Travis Scott. So that starts off with C minor 9. So we've got the D is the 9 on top. And then it goes to B flat. So it kind of feels like we're in B flat. And then the second part of the beat goes to an E flat major. And then it goes to a D11. The really cool thing that it does is when it switches to that D, it keeps that E flat for part of the bar. So it's really dissonant. So that's just a really creative way to go kind of left field in terms of your chord construction. So I want to show you a beat I recently put together where I kind of tried to create 3 different chord progressions in one. So I'm just using Addictive Keys for my first sound here, and I'm using Astra for the second sound. I've got this keys silver key, and there's just so many parameters you can play with in Astra that it just helps also with finding the sound that you want to go for, especially when you're doing something like this with going into different progressions. So I'm just doing F minor to C minor, and then I go into E flat minor. I've got E flat, G flat is the minor third. So I've got 3 different chords here. I go to a B flat for my second chord, and then a B. So that's definitely outside of our first progression with the F minor to C minor. You notice I have an E flat on top here when I end this first progression, and that leads well into the E flat minor chord here. And then we're using for E flat minor a natural minor with the flatted 6, so that B is what makes that work, and we're playing a major, B major. So I've got the F sharp is the 5, and then we're actually adding the major 7, which is A sharp, and then we've got the 3rd on top, D sharp. So all those flat keys work within the context of E flat minor. And notice I kept this piano up here. So the notes I'm playing here, so B flat, A flat, B flat to F. So it's really ambiguous, and that fits into, actually it fits into the first progression we did and the second, and then it leads well into the third progression. So here we've actually switched to E flat major. So that minor to major was a really interesting transition, and just gives you a good example of how you can go outside of a key or modulate or do something harmonically that's going to take your productions in a different direction. Tip number 2 is using effects. Duh. This one is a little obvious, but I want to just go into some creative ways you can use effects. I want to go over a little bit of some common effects that are used, particularly in hip-hop, that you can use on various sounds to just take them in a different direction and create more ambiance and more texture. So you can see I have a lot of plugins here on my piano track. just have some basic EQ, some more EQ, and I've got a filter here. This is just a low pass. And then I've added some other stuff. I did add some compression just to keep it sort of tamed. And the order of this may be, you know, you could do this a little differently. I kind of did it in a weird order, but you can get creative with this too. It's going to create different sounds depending on which order of the effects you put first. And then I've got a flanger here, so it's very common to put a flanger on like anything really. I mean, but very often on like a piano or a guitar, it just sort of creates this interesting effect. So just a lot more ambiance. It kind of softens it as well. And you can just do so much with all kinds of effects. And when I say effects, I mean plugins, but also just manipulating audio or even your MIDI tracks. So another common thing to do is reversing audio. So we've got MIDI here. We could reverse it like this, or we could use a plugin like I really like Melda Production M Rhythmizer. It's kind of like gross beat for FL Studio, so we can actually reverse it with one of these presets. I don't think it works great on this particular track, but we can manipulate it a little bit more to see what else might work. We could add some halftime. The movement might be a little fast, so with halftime you can actually bounce this and stretch the audio yourself, but I do really like this plugin Cable Guy's halftime. You can really manipulate the parameters a lot to get the sound you prefer. So that creates a really interesting effect, and again, it's just all about playing around with different effects on top of each other, just manipulating as much as you can, really, to be creative. Tip number 3 is adding ear candy. You probably have heard of this term before, especially if you follow producers like Timbaland, who is a master at this, with adding the wicka wicka and all that. Like, that was terrible, but you get the point. So he just, you know, he adds all kinds of crazy stuff into his beats. Baby sounds, crazy percussion sounds, and it really just creates this bounce that's unique to Timbaland. So you can do the same. You can really get creative with this, and I want to show you some examples of how I've tried to do this. So this is another beat where I've used some interesting effects. I have this vocal chop that I've reversed and cut up, and I've also manipulated the pitch with Sound Shifter. This is a Waves plugin, so this is what the beat sounds like. So when I say ear candy, you know, it's really like creating a percussive element out of anything. So even with this vocal sample that I chopped up, the parts that you can see repeated here, the parts I've chopped up here kind of have a rhythmic purpose more than anything. And then it works well with some of the other percussion I have. So I have this construction sound, and I'm offsetting that with just a shaker. So with those perks in there and the vocal chops, it kind of creates this unique bounce. And I could even get more creative with this in Logic's Drum Machine Designer here. You can even go into the sample and reverse it if you want. So just endless possibilities with that. So don't be afraid to experiment. So along the same lines, I can actually do something with with my snare that hits on the 2 and the 4. I actually have it layered up already, a snare and a clap, but I can make it more interesting by adding another sound on the 2 or the 4. So let's just experiment here. I've got Beatmaker open, just sort of testing out different sounds, and what's great is I can actually manipulate this. I can shorten the sample if I want. I can add some reverb or delay. I can even change these parameters. I can use a flanger, which I just talked about, manipulate the envelope, add some EQ, drive. It's just filter too, which is great. So this is a great way to just experiment and use for a sampler when you're testing out different drums or different perks. So I've got some toms, a clave, and just some more traditional stuff. Let's just sort of play around. So that might sound cool with just a little added delay. The pitch is already sounding good, so I don't have to mess with that. So I might want to just play with the delay a little bit on this and go crazy. So you can just really get creative with that, and the more you play with rhythm, the more of a bounce you're going to get. You want to be careful not to go too crazy. You still want to leave room for the artist, but again, Timbaland is just the perfect example of this, of how he fits in these perks, and also still keep space. You know, you don't want to overdo it and have the same perks hitting every 4 bars. You want to space it out. You also want to make things more interesting, so maybe use some perks in part of the beat, different perks in another part of the beat. Tip number 4 is adding a drone or some kind of FX to your beat to just fill it out and create a little bit more interest. So this can be anything from some like lo-fi texture crackling to like a sustained note is really common, like maybe a string note that's just like really faint in the background that just sustains through the whole beat or parts of the beat. This can also mean percussion that plays throughout or parts of the beat that just sort of adds a little texture. So here I actually have a Splice sample that I've added, and what's cool is I actually just experimented with Splice's bridge plugin. So with this I can just kind of play around with the Splice app and test different samples. I can change the pitch if applicable. I can also time stretch. I can half time the sample, I can double it, and just simply copy the sample right in the app and paste it into my session. So that's what I actually did here. And this loop that I have is a percussion loop, and I actually stretched it so it's half the time of what it's supposed to be. And it just kind of sounds unique by itself. And I actually really like how it comes in on the second part of the beat. I think it works even better. Tip number 5 is the delayed drop. This is one of my favorites actually that I haven't used enough. I learned this from Disclosure. I mean, I've heard it before, but I didn't pay attention to it enough. I was watching a video of Disclosure breaking down one of his tracks, and he specifically pointed out the delayed drop and how effective that is. So I have this beat here that's kind of normal. It has a riser going into the hook, and it's got a crash right at the downbeat. So to make this a little bit more interesting is I can move things over and delay the drop. So I can move this crash over somewhere, maybe the middle of the first bar. Or right when that kick hits. And then I can move the 808 out. Move the hats out. So maybe to make this crash fit a little bit better, I can reverse it. a fader. So that just creates, again, a little bit more interest in the beat. And again, this is something you can use easily in a lot of genres. It works super well in EDM. Tip number 6 is using risers. So in the example I just showed you, I had this kind of weird sound that was reversed and created this rising effect that went into the hook. And then to create that delayed drop, I also created a riser out of the cymbal I had, that crash. I reversed it, so it created this rising effect also in the beginning of the hook. So those are very common ways of using risers, but you can get creative with it and use risers in different parts of the beat. It doesn't just have to be going into a drop. So something like the reverse crash, reverse cymbal, reverse open hat can go really well leading into a snare. Let's just try that out to see what it sounds like. So again, just a really quick example of how to create interest in the middle of your beat too. That riser worked perfectly going into the snare. It created another type of bounce. So get crazy with the risers. Don't overdo it, but definitely experiment with using them outside of the context of going into a drop. And finally, tip number 7 is to choose parts of your beat where you want to create a lot of interest, where you want to maybe go a little crazy. And this is helpful to think of, okay, I want to focus on maybe the 808 or parts of the drums, the hi-hats, or on my melodies, and I want to make that part of the beat crazy, because you don't want to overdo it and make everything crazy. And also, whatever you're doing to manipulate different parts of the beat can get lost in the mix because you've got so much going on. And also think outside of the box when you're doing this. So on the 808, maybe you want to create some automation where parts of it is filtered, or you've got panning going on different runs. So for example, on this beat, if I play around with my 808 with some automation, I can create a really cool effect. One way I can do this is with Cable Guy's Shaper Box. Also, shout out to Jay Cactus. He makes a lot of drill beats, and I saw him using this on an 808, and I just thought it was brilliant. So this is what I'm showing you now. So we actually used a drive on the 808 to create some movement. Let's just experiment with some of the built-in settings. So I do want to be careful with this because I've fattened up this 808 a little bit, so I might want to turn down some of these settings. And maybe I only want to do this for the upper frequencies, or the mids and the highs, and not really the lows. I can also pan the 808, and I can just do it for part of it. Obviously, it would be too much to do it throughout. I could go crazy with this too at the end. Another cool trick that I like to do sometimes is using a phaser on hi-hats. Kind of creates this underwater effect a little bit. So it's giving me some interesting tones. I've got almost like a melody going on with this. And I'm just using one of the presets in Logic stock phaser. So I just showed you 2 examples using different parts of the drums. We did a lot with melodies already, manipulating them with the effects, changing up the harmonic structure, modulating. So again, all of this is just showing you different avenues you can go toward creating a different kind of sound in your beats or just being more creative. So I hope this helped give you some ideas for creating more unique productions. Thanks for watching.